Every child learns their first language without a single grammar lesson. They don't memorize verb conjugations or study vocabulary lists. Yet by age 5, they speak fluently. Something profound happens in those early years that most language courses completely miss. When people sit down to learn a new language as adults, they typically reach for a textbook. They start memorizing words. They study conjugation tables. They practice grammar drills. And after months or even years of this, they still can't hold a basic conversation. Why? Because they're trying to build a house by memorizing the names of all the tools instead of actually building. The brain doesn't learn languages the way textbooks teach them. Understanding this difference changes everything. Consider what happens when someone opens a language textbook. The first chapter usually presents a list of common phrases. Hello, goodbye, my name is, where is the bathroom? The student dutifully writes these down, repeats them, tries to commit them to memory. Then they move to chapter 2, which introduces new phrases and perhaps some basic grammar rules. The pattern continues. Memorize, drill, test, move forward. This approach treats language like a collection of facts to be stored. But language isn't a collection of anything. It's a living system, a way of thinking, a method the brain uses to represent reality. You can't memorize your way into a system any more than you can memorize your way into understanding how a car engine works just by learning the names of all its parts. The fundamental mistake people make is confusing knowledge about a language with the ability to use it. These are completely different things. You can know every grammar rule in Spanish and still freeze when someone asks you a simple question in a cafe. Knowledge sits in one part of the brain. Ability lives somewhere else entirely. So how does the brain actually acquire language? Look again at that 5-year-old child. They don't know what a verb is. They couldn't explain subject-verb agreement. Yet they use language correctly, naturally, without thinking. How? The child does something that seems almost too simple to be powerful. They play with the language. They hear sounds, they try to make those sounds, they notice what happens. They don't ask, what's the rule? They ask, what happens if I say it this way? They experiment, they fail, they adjust, they try again. And gradually, through thousands of these little experiments, the brain builds an intuition for how the language works. This is the key that unlocks everything. Intuition, not memorization. Here's the method. And it works because it aligns with how the brain naturally processes language. Take any piece of writing in the language you're learning. It doesn't matter if it's a children's book, a newspaper article, or a technical manual. Choose something you're genuinely curious about. This matters more than you might think. The brain pays attention to what interests it and largely ignores what doesn't. Now, don't do what most people do. Don't look up every word you don't know. Don't study the grammar. Instead, do this. Read it and try to guess what it means. Not a wild guess, but an informed guess, based on whatever you can figure out. Maybe you recognize a few words. Maybe the context gives you clues. Maybe you can see patterns in how words connect to each other. Use all of it. Then, and this is crucial, check if you were right. Find a translation or ask someone who knows the language. But here's where it gets interesting. You're not checking to memorize the correct answer. You're checking to see if your mental model works. When you guess wrong, your brain notices the gap between what you expected and what's actually true. That gap is pure gold. That's where learning happens. The brain is a prediction machine. It's constantly trying to anticipate what comes next, what things mean, how patterns work. When your prediction is wrong, the brain updates its model. It adjusts. It learns. But this only happens if you make predictions first. If you just look up the answer without guessing, the brain has nothing to update. The information slides in and slides right back out. This is why memorizing vocabulary lists feels so futile. You're feeding the brain answers to questions it never asked. There's no prediction, no gap, no learning mechanism engaged. The words sit in short-term memory for a while, then evaporate. But when you struggle to figure out what a sentence means, when you wrestle with it, when you form a hypothesis and then test it, you're engaging the same mechanism that 5-year-old uses. You're building intuition. Let's go deeper into what this means. Every language has its own internal logic, its own way of carving up reality. In English, we say, I am cold. In Spanish, they say tengo frío, which literally translates to I have coldness. That's not just a different way of saying the same thing. It's a different way of thinking about the experience of being cold. You own the coldness rather than being it. When you memorize that, tengo frío means I am cold. You learn a translation, but you don't learn the logic. You don't develop an intuition for how Spanish thinks about states of being versus possession. The translation is a bridge, but it's a bridge you're supposed to cross and then leave behind. Here's what happens when you use the prediction method instead. You encounter tengo frío in a sentence. You know, tengo has something to do with having. You've seen frío before, maybe connected to ice or winter. You think, I have cold? Maybe it means I feel cold? You check. You're right. Your brain notices, Spanish uses possession for internal states that English treats as being. The next time you encounter this pattern, maybe with tengo hambre for I am hungry, you don't need to look it up. Your brain predicts. If cold is having, hunger probably works the same way. You check. Correct again. The pattern strengthens. You're not memorizing translations anymore. You're developing a feel for how the language thinks. This is the difference between learning vocabulary and learning language. Vocabulary is a list. Language is a system. Systems can't be memorized. They have to be felt, discovered, intuited. But there's another layer to this that makes it even more powerful. After you've read something and checked your understanding, do this. Explain it to yourself out loud in the target language as if you're teaching it to someone else. Don't just repeat what you read. Rephrase it. Use your own words, even if they're clumsy. Try to express the same idea in a different way. Why does this work? Because explaining something forces you to truly understand it. When you just read or listen, your brain can be lazy. It can nod along, creating the illusion of understanding without really processing deeply. But when you have to explain something, you can't fake it. The gaps in your understanding become immediately obvious. Plus, speaking activates different neural pathways than reading. You're not just recognizing patterns anymore. You're producing them. The brain has to actively construct sentences, choose words, apply patterns. This builds the actual machinery of language use, not just the ability to recognize it. Think about what happens in that moment when you're trying to explain something in the new language. You want to say a particular thing, but you don't know the exact words, so you have to work around it. You have to find another way to express the same idea using the limited vocabulary you have. This is exactly what fluent speakers do all the time. They don't know every word either. They know how to navigate around gaps, how to use what they have to get where they want to go. Every time you struggle to express an idea and find a way through, you're strengthening that navigational ability. You're teaching your brain that language is flexible, that there are multiple paths to any destination. This is the opposite of the textbook approach, which implies there's one right way to say everything. Here's something else that happens with this method. You start to develop a relationship with ambiguity. Most language learning materials try to eliminate ambiguity. Everything is clear, defined, explained, but real language is full of ambiguity. Words have multiple meanings. Context matters. Nuance exists. When you're guessing at meaning, you're sitting with ambiguity. You're developing comfort with not knowing exactly, with having a general sense rather than a precise definition. This is how native speakers experience their own language. They don't have dictionary definitions in their heads. They have fuzzy, context-dependent intuitions. A native Spanish speaker doesn't think, tengo frío means I am cold. They hear tengo frío and directly feel the concept of coldness, no translation required. That directness, that immediate connection between sound and meaning, is what you're building when you work with intuition instead of memorization. The speed of this matters too. 15 minutes might seem impossibly short for meaningful language learning, but that's because most people spend those 15 minutes inefficiently. They read a page, look up 10 words, forget 9 of them, and repeat. Exhausting and futile. Instead, take one paragraph, just one, spend 15 minutes with it, but spend those minutes intensely. Read it. Guess at every unknown word and phrase. Check yourself, read it again, noticing what you missed the first time. Explain it out loud in your own words. Try to write a similar paragraph about something else. Play with the structures you found. Rearrange them. See what breaks and what works. 15 minutes of this kind of active, playful engagement builds more real language ability than an hour of passive vocabulary memorization. Why? Because you're not trying to add information to your brain. You're trying to change how your brain works. You're building new neural pathways, new ways of thinking. That happens through doing, through struggling, through playing, not through memorizing. This is also why children learn so much faster than adults. Even though adults theoretically have better study skills and more discipline, children are willing to sound stupid. They babble. They make mistakes constantly. They don't care. Adults want to be correct before they speak, so they study rules and memorize phrases, hoping to achieve correctness before attempting production. But the brain learns by doing, not by preparing to do. There's a deeper principle at work here, one that applies far beyond language learning. The brain is not a storage device. It's a pattern recognition and pattern generation system. It learns by finding regularities in experience, by building models that predict what will happen, by adjusting those models when predictions fail. Every time you encounter something that surprises you, something that doesn't fit your current model, your brain has a choice. It can dismiss the anomaly, or it can update the model. Active engagement, the kind where you make predictions and test them, forces the brain to update. Passive reception, like listening to a lecture or reading a textbook, lets the brain stay comfortable with its current model. This is why explaining things to yourself matters so much. When you try to use a pattern you think you've learned, you discover whether you actually understand it. If you can't use it, you don't really know it yet. The attempt to use it reveals the gaps, and revelation of gaps is the first step toward filling them. Now, what does this look like in practice? Imagine sitting down with a simple book in French. You've been learning French for a month using this method. You open to a new page. There's a sentence, Le chat dort sur le canapé. You know, le chat is the cat. You've seen dort before, connected to sleeping. Sur means on. Le canapé is new, but context suggests furniture. You guess, the cat sleeps on the couch. You check. Correct. But notice what else you just learned without trying. Elle is used for both masculine nouns. You've now seen it with chat and canapé. The pattern strengthens. Next sentence. Il rêve de souris. Il is he or it. Rêve is new. De means of. Souris, you don't know. But you have a cat sleeping, so probably dreaming. Of what? What do cats dream of? You guess, he dreams of mice. You check. Right. And you've just learned rêve in context, connected to an image, tied to meaning, not just as a word on a vocabulary list. This is playful. This is active. This is how children learn, and it's how adults can learn if they set aside the belief that learning must be serious, structured, and systematic. The most important shift is internal. Stop trying to learn French or Spanish or Japanese. Instead, start trying to think in French, to think in Spanish, to think in Japanese. Even if you only know 20 words, use those 20 words to think. When you see a dog on the street, try to think dog in the target language. When you're hungry, think I am hungry in the target language, even if you have to look up the phrase first. This constant low-level engagement does more than any formal study session because it integrates the language into your actual thinking process. Language isn't something separate that you pull out when needed. It's the substrate of thought itself. When you use it to think, even in small ways, you're building that substrate. Here's the truth that textbooks won't tell you. You don't need to know many words to start using a language meaningfully. You need to know how to use the words you have. A child with a 300-word vocabulary can express an enormous range of ideas because they know how to play with those words, how to combine them, how to use context and gesture and tone. An adult with a 3,000-word vocabulary often can't say anything because they learned those words as isolated facts, not as tools for thinking. They know what the words mean in English, but they don't know how to use them, how they fit together, what patterns they form. This method fixes that. Every prediction you make, every guess you test, every explanation you construct, you're learning how to use the language, not just what it means. You're building the doing, not just the knowing. And here's what happens over time. The language starts to feel different. At first, every sentence is a puzzle you have to consciously solve, but gradually, some things start to feel automatic. You see a sentence structure you've encountered before, and you understand it immediately, no translation required. You want to express an idea, and a phrase appears in your mind in the target language, not English. These moments of directness, where the language connects straight to meaning without passing through translation, are small victories. Each one represents a piece of real language ability. String enough of them together, and you have fluency. The path isn't memorizing 10,000 vocabulary words and all the grammar rules. The path is using what you know, however little, to engage with the